Hey, good morning, class. Good morning, Professor Kristaps. My advocate's main claim was that it is necessary to have manned missions to the moon before going to Mars. His main reasoning behind going to the moon first is that we need to analyze and observe the astronauts for long-term psychoanalysis, and secondly, to use the moon as a staging area to test systems and equipment. He first brings up the issue of people developing post-traumatic stress disorder. A definition of the post-traumatic stress disorder by Medicine.net says the post-traumatic stress disorder is an emotional illness that develops as a result of terribly frightening, life-threatening, or otherwise highly unsafe experiences. This is true that there are very many people, especially military personnel, that was affected by this. He quoted the Washington Post, which was put out in April 18, 2009. 1 in 5 soldiers, almost 300,000, who have fought in Iraq or Afghanistan have major depression or post-traumatic stress disorder. But this should not be assumed that the majority of the population has this or will end up getting this. Because, combat is a very life-changing event. And obviously, not everybody has the mentality of a soldier. Astronauts go through constant evaluations, especially while they're in the process of nominating a crew, which weeds out most of those that might have prior issues. Not saying like they get all of them, such as that woman that drew on a wild rampage. Also, while they are on the mission, there are doctors that are constantly looking and monitoring their health, along with evaluations taken before and after every mission. Secondly, he brings up the point that this trip will take a long period of time, between 17 and 36 months. There have been people that have spent huge amounts of time out in space. There is a Russian astronaut, Sergei Kirilev. Sorry, I'm not very good at Russian. I speak Latvian. Not my area, but he spent a whopping 748 days out in space, which is equivalent to approximately 2.5 years or 30 months. Psychological stress is part of it, but that's not the greatest danger that I've found out. There are other things that can be affected, such as physical breakdown. From an article in August 2005 from newscientist.com, they said that with a disciplined exercise program, most people lose an average of 1.5% of the bone mass in certain body parts, such as the hips and lower back, for every month in space. That is about the same amount of bone mass a post-menopausal woman loses in a year. So that's a lot of bone mass that's being lost, and considering that for such a long period of time as you are going out, it's going to cause quite an impact on your body. If anything, it is important that we be able to carry out the mission after such a long duration in space, which can compromise everything that they are trying to accomplish. He talks about how if something goes wrong, then help is too far away. This plays a role in practicing and going through simulations. Because of this, we are beginning to create scenarios, leading to my third point. He states that we need to practice using the equipment in a space environment, such as the moon. This is not necessary because there already have been numerous experiments that have taken place in areas such as Arizona, where simulations have been put together to represent the red planet. Other ways that NASA goes about practicing in zero-gravity environments is by having simulations underwater where their weight can be adjusted to the amount of gravity needed. Also, at this moment, the European Space Agency is working with a crew of 6 that will undergo living conditions for 500 days. From their website, they said that the modular spacecraft measures some 550 cubic meters, equivalent of 9 truck containers, and it is based at the Russian Institute for Biomedical Problems in the Russian capital. So this is a thing that they're going forth and making sure that they have everything figured out. The astronauts know how to adjust to any kind of problem or scenario. So we do not have the time and resources to have manned missions to the moon before going to Mars. Thank you.
All right, well, it hasn't been morning for 4 hours, but thank you for wishing me a good morning anyway. You label the advocate's claims pretty clearly, so it's easy to follow. Your whole discussion on post-traumatic stress disorder, you give us a definition, and there's a lot of discussion about the military examples and experiences. It seems like the inference that you're making here is that maybe we haven't screened people adequately, and maybe the advocate's saying that if we did the moon missions, that would do the kind of screening that goes on. I was really unclear about how any of the development that you presented addressed the advocate's point. Instead, it seemed to be that we have other ways of screening people for this. And my impression, I don't remember the argument exactly, was that we need to be able to test people who might develop this as a result of being in space. I thought you had better arguments later on when you were talking about some of the experimental things that were going on. The transition to the second point is pretty solid. And I did like the evidence that you had on that with the example of the Russian who'd been in space for 30 months. Again, the argument that the advocate's presenting is that we need to go to the moon in order to do this kind of testing, and what you need to do is kind of complete the syllogism that you've created, which is, based on the experience we have, we know that people are going to be okay for this amount of time because they were in fact okay in this situation, so that we don't need additional information on this point. That would be a clearer explanation of what the argument was. And then you kind of get into the argument about bone mass, and it's all interesting information, but again, I'm not sure how it addresses the issue that the advocate is talking about. I think there might be an argument here that says, look, bone mass is going to deteriorate. That's just the way it works. And whether or not we go to the moon or straight to Mars, the bone mass is still going to deteriorate. What difference does it make? Maybe that's the argument that you ought to be making. The clearest argument, though, and the clearest application that you had was on the third point, where it's basically we need experience and they need to test all this stuff. And you had good counterclaims, although you do need to give us a source citation on some of this information about testing in the deserts of Arizona and underwater. And then you had the European crew and their 500-day test that's going on, and I thought that definitely applied to the argument that the advocate's presenting there. All right, thank you.